Marin Solon woke to the sound of miniature thunder. It was a ritual now, one that had begun 3 months ago, when the Confederation had assigned her to the remote outpost on Velkar 7. The tiny roar came again, insistent and proud, vibrating against her pillow. She cracked open one eye to find Kib standing at attention beside her head, his small chest puffed out, whiskers trembling with the effort of maintaining military bearing. "Report," Kib announced in his high-pitched growl. "Perimeter secure. No incidents overnight. Thermal readings? Nominal." Marin couldn't help but smile. The cub was no taller than her forearm, his striped fur still soft with youth, but he took his duties with the seriousness of a seasoned officer. Behind him, 3 other cubs waited in formation at the foot of her bed, their tails swishing with barely contained excitement. The Velkari had not understood humans at first. When the Confederation sent Marin as the diplomatic liaison to their warrior species, they had expected someone larger. The Velkari stood nearly 3 meters tall when fully grown, with claws that could rend steel and voices that could shake mountains. They were apex predators, conquerors of their star system before they'd even achieved faster-than-light travel. Humans, by comparison, seemed fragile, weak, unworthy of respect. That assessment had lasted exactly 1 week. Marin sat up slowly, careful not to disturb Kib's presentation. The cub continued his briefing with adorable gravity. Food stores checked. Water purification at 97% efficiency. Guard rotation maintained throughout night cycle. "Excellent work, Kib," Marin said seriously, matching his tone. "Any concerns to report?" The cub's ears flattened slightly. Senna attempted to eat recreational supplies again. From the formation, a smaller cub, Senna, presumably let out an embarrassed chirp. Marin bit back a laugh. The recreational supplies were her chocolate bars, and apparently, they were as irresistible to Velkari cubs as they were to human children. "I'll secure them better," Marin promised. Dismissed. The cubs broke formation immediately, bouncing around her quarters with renewed energy. Kib remained, however, his golden eyes studying her face with an intensity that always surprised her. "You are patient with us," he said quietly, dropping the formal military speak. "The elders say humans are weak because they do not roar. But I think you roar differently." "Rum." Marin reached out and gently scratched behind his tufted ears. The cub leaned into her touch, purring despite his attempts to maintain dignity. "Everyone has their own kind of strength, Kib." It was a lesson she'd learned to teach carefully. The adult Velkari had initially dismissed her entirely. When Commander Thros had bared his fangs at her during their first meeting, a threat display meant to establish dominance, Marin had simply stood her ground and waited. She hadn't flinched, hadn't run, hadn't even raised her voice. She had simply outlasted him. That patience, that stubborn human endurance, had confused them. Velkari culture was built on immediate displays of power, on physical dominance, and thunderous declarations. They didn't understand someone who could be soft and still be strong, who could be small and still be immovable. But the cubs understood. Perhaps it was because they were still young enough to recognize that size wasn't everything. Or perhaps it was because Marin treated them like the intelligent beings they were, not as lesser versions of their parents. She listened to their reports. She took their concerns seriously. She taught them that leadership wasn't about being the loudest in the room. The cubs had taken to following her everywhere, self-appointing themselves as her honor guard. At first, the adult Velkari had found it amusing in the way adults everywhere found children's games cute, but ultimately meaningless. Then came the incident with the Krill raiders. Marin had been in the settlement's central garden when the attack sirens blared. The Krill had bypassed the planetary defense grid somehow, landing a strike team in the heart of the compound. They were after the Confederation's weapon schematics stored in the outpost's core. The adult Velkari had rushed to defensive positions, preparing for direct combat. But Marin had learned something during her months on Velkar 7, something the cubs had taught her through their morning reports and their careful observations. Small didn't mean ineffective. While the adults engaged the Krill head-on, Marin had coordinated the cubs. They knew every ventilation shaft, Every service tunnel, every hidden passage in the compound, they were small enough to move unseen, quick enough to avoid detection. And under Marin's direction, they became something the Krill had never expected. An intelligence network. Kib, 3 hostiles in Corridor 7. They're trying to access the East Terminal. Relay to Commander Thross, they're splitting their forces. The Cubs had become her eyes and ears, and through them, Marin had orchestrated a defense that turned the Krill's surprise attack into a decisive defeat. Not through raw power, but through information, coordination, and the kind of strategic thinking that didn't require fangs or claws. Commander Thross had looked at her differently after that. They all had. Now, as Kib finished his morning report and scampered off to join his siblings, Marin stood and prepared for another day. Through her window, she could see adult Velkari moving through the compound, their massive forms powerful and intimidating, but scattered among them were the Cubs, small and energetic, learning that strength came in many forms. Last night, she'd overheard Kib explaining to another Cub why humans were the most dangerous species in the Confederation. Not because they were the strongest or the fastest or the most heavily armed, but because they never give up, and they think about tomorrow, while everyone else is thinking about today. Marin smiled at the memory. The Cub had understood something that had taken her years to articulate. Humanity's greatest weapon had never been its technology or its combat prowess. It was persistence, the ability to plan, to adapt, to outlast any opponent through sheer, stubborn determination. And maybe, just maybe, the ability to recognize that everyone, even tiny Cubs with squeaky roars, had something valuable to contribute. Her datapad chimed with the day's schedule. Diplomatic meetings with the Velkari Council. Weapons system reviews. Cultural exchange programs. The work of building bridges between species was never done. But first, she had morning reports to file. Reports from her honor guard, delivered with all the seriousness their small hearts could muster. After all, humans understood something that many warrior species didn't. The greatest leaders were those who listened to the smallest voices. And on Velkar 7, those voices roared.